Hello and welcome to the year of being 70. I'm Lucy Macara and I'm with my childhood friend Lisette Schoutemaker. She is in Amsterdam and I am in Norfolk in the UK. And this is our 16th episode since we've been, yes, 16, since we've been 70, or at least since I've been 70 to be quite specific, because
I'm
Lisette
I'm 1 month older
a
to the
whole month
day, to
older.
the
To the
day.
day, yes, exactly. We have been recording weekly conversations, looking back at our really rather long lives now and how we are and what it's like to be 70 in 2025.
Yeah, so this time we thought we spoke about being 40 and how that was a turning point in our life. And when I look around me at people in their 40s or nearing their 40s or just turned 40, I see that it is kind of a moment between young adulthood and true adulthood. And many things changed for us. So now we're going to look at the first 5 years between 94 and the year 2000, the magical year 2000, and how we were, what we perceived, how we felt, what happened. So let's talk about that, Lucy.
So, yes. In 1994, as I've said before, I was in some amount of turmoil. I was getting divorced, but then I got remarried in 1995. And that meant sort of a lot of upheaval in terms of moving. I think I moved house about 3 or 4 times during that
uh,
period.
with
Also,
with young children.
with young children, yes, yes. It wasn't easy. Also, my father died in 1995, so that was another. I mean, it was obviously terribly sad, but that just added to my sort of sense of, the world has shifted a bit for me. I could sort of feel the pillars that had held up my mental constructs had kind of shaken and broken to some extent. And I
So
think
that was your father and your marriage.
yeah,
Yeah. How old was your father when he
my
died?
father was 86. I think that's right. He was born in 1908. So really I mean, he was 20 years older than my mum, so he was really an Edwardian. He was in his 40s when I was born.
I don't know what that means, being an
Oh,
Edwardian.
right. Well, he was born in the age of King Edward, I suppose, post-Victorian.
Yeah.
I just mean it in the sense of the kind of mindset. He was not really a modern man. And yes, so he was kind of almost like a generation above what most people's fathers were, I suppose. But that had its strengths and its weaknesses. But he died. He'd been blind for 12 years.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, I mean that was extraordinary because he was a quiet man, he was a reader, he was a writer, he was a scholar, and to all intents and purposes, he totally depended on his eyesight. And then he got a pancreatic illness. I think his pancreas leaked, and the end result of that, which is not normal, I don't think, but the infection got into his eyes and he started not to be able to see properly. And then within, I don't know, 6 months or a year of having this really serious illness where we thought he was going to die, he recovered from that, but went blind. And that was such a huge, obviously, event and issue that my mum had to cope with. And also, I mean, we had, yeah, so he'd been blind. He'd had people reading to him a lot. He used to listen to, I mean, it was very primitive in those days. He had the Royal Society of the Blind had the precursor to audiobooks. I mean, there were tapes,
Yeah.
but they would have this great huge kind of tape playing machine.
Yeah.
And he got every week he could choose books, and they're read for free by wonderful actors and voice artists. So
Yeah,
he
but just to mark that even then, with now audiobooks, being everywhere and easily accessible, and we have them on what we still call our phone, but back then, that's not even that long ago.
No. No,
That's not
no.
even that long ago.
No, and he used to order every week. They used to come in these big packages, huge cassettes that
Yeah.
would go into this machine, which had very simple dials. Because obviously, for
Yeah.
people who can't see, you can't have
Yeah.
complicated dials. So it's sort of like on, off, forward. Anyway, so he used to spend a lot of time listening to books, and
Yeah.
also, luckily for him, in a way, he had always dictated the books he'd written and had somebody type them up. So he was still able to dictate. I think he wrote his last book when he was blind, and I think I typed it up. Um, but it was, I mean, I really admire being able to do that because I can't coherently, as you can probably hear, I can't coherently speak. I need to see what I think written down. But he was able to, speak very, very coherently and in sensible sentences.
I
And
don't know about this disparaging thing that you just said. You know, I mean, you haven't written this conversation down. This just arises in the moment, right?
That's true, but it's full of ums and ers, and I probably, if I tried to transcribe it, it would probably, I think you speak much more cogently than I do. I genuinely feel I need to write things down and see words before I can get clarity on them. So yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yes, so he anyway he had he was in hospital and not really expected to die, I think, but then he had a heart attack and passed away. And actually, because he was, I mean, the results of him going to hospital might have meant that he couldn't walk anymore either. So I think in a way it was a blessed release. He didn't have to go back into a life where he could neither see nor walk nor, so
No.
86 was
Final years are not
not fun.
easy to
No,
negotiate at
no.
all. And so for your father, yeah, mine too, but that was a bit later. But it's like, okay, at some point, it's kind of a, yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
and already being blind, it's so, I can't even imagine,
No.
so difficult to imagine
Yeah,
to
absolutely.
see through hearing and through touch, but not through your eyes anymore.
Yes, and my youngest son was born just after he'd gone blind, so
Ah,
he never saw him. He could
oh,
only feel him,
yeah, feel
hold him.
him.
We've got a very poignant portrait of him holding the baby that my brother, who's an artist, painted, and it's sort of yeah, it's very moving, really, because he's looking at him, but he can't see him.
Mm.
So what was
Yeah, so
happening?
that was the beginning of your, final 5 years of the previous century that we were
That's
born
right.
into.
Yeah. So what was happening to you at that time?
Yeah, so we talked about being 40. I sold my company and I came into a whole new awareness of the interconnectedness of life and of the role of us humans and also the role of companies in this. And so after selling my communications agency to one part to my partner and one part to the best people who were in my employ at the time, I was kind of free, but I still had some clients on kind of board level, but also yeah, I found companies who were questioning, what are the effects of what we do and how can we do that better? And so it was, and I was in this group. It was called the Club van Schier. Means nothing to you in the UK,
It
but
doesn't
it
know,
might mean
sorry.
something to some people who are as old as we are. And Schier, it was short for Schiermonnikoog, which is one of the islands that are, on our coastline up north. And there was a group of people there, entrepreneurs, media people, thinkers, uh, who said, if everything is interconnected, how will we, if we go from that, what do we do? And they published a very inspiring kind of manifesto. And I was not there, but I got introduced to them later. And then it was a very exciting time of thinking and, trying to kind of gauge the future through the lens of interdependence and interconnectedness. And we never quite got a second kind of hit of inspiration. And so at some point, the money ran out and the ideas ran out and the time ran out. And then we played the game of transformation, which was in 94, actually. We played a game of transformation, which transformed my whole life and which put
Wow.
me on a trajectory of finding out where this amazing game, uh, which you play like a game, it's a board game, but you play it with an intention and you get all kinds of insights and angels. Like I have this little angel here on
Oh,
my.
I love those little cards. Yes, I've seen those.
Yeah, they come from the game of transformation. And
Ah.
yeah, so it's
So
it's
what were
kind of.
what were the main insights for you personally that came from that?
Well, that's a long time ago, and I've played many games
Oh,
since.
right.
But what happened was that so you each play like on your own life field, and I don't remember what my intention was at the time. But in two throws, I came to the depression field, which means that you're kind of stuck. And in game terms, you get awareness tokens in all kinds of way. When you hit an insight square, with insight come, new awareness, which are symbolized by these tokens, which with words on them like clarity or purpose or power or whatever. And and as a token of isolation when you're in depression, I had to turn those little cards around. And that was actually the first time somebody gave me an instruction that felt to me, because I had been in therapy and looking at this, why do I end up in this black hole for so many months, every other year, every other winter. And this was the first time I thought, wow, this is a whole new approach. She said it's a symbol that when you are in depression, you cannot connect to your usual way of perceiving things, to your level of consciousness that you have. Your consciousness kind of closes down. And I was like, wow, wow.
Oh, fascinating.
And yeah, and it was also the very, very first time that I spoke about being depressed to friends and colleagues. We were, eight around the table, which is a bit of a big number, and we were all very verbal. So it took a long time to make even one round. But the instruction is when you're in depression, you're actually not connected to other people. You're completely in your own world. So she asked me not to connect to others, not to engage. But, after two people had done their turn and been very, um, uh, she looked at me and she said, this facilitator said, I think you can connect to the feeling of depression. And it was the first time I spoke about it. And my
Wow.
friend said, no, Lisette, not you. You're bright, you're up, you're everywhere, you're active. We all have our bad days or our bad spells. And I said, it's really not that. It's really months and months and it recurs. And I have very dark thoughts. And so it was a huge,
Gosh, that
huge
is
opening,
yeah.
huge opening to another approach to, yeah, to the path I had unwittingly taken that led me down to the black hole, and also an introduction to Findhorn that has been a major, it's a center of light, and it has been a major, yeah, love of my life.
That's really amazing. So that was an absolute turning point for you, being able to understand something new about your depression, but also to be able to be open about it. And did that then have an effect on, did that lift your depression? Was that a way forward to, I'm not going to say curing it or
Yeah, I see it like, you're here and you take a fork in the road, which in my case led, to this dark, dark, dark place in myself. But I learned, to see the signs, read the signs, and retrace my steps, and be able to live in the light, not negating the dark and the grief and the harshness of life, but not being in it and succumbing to it. So it was really the start. Also, I had met Jos, and Jos was not, when I, was like I felt taken by depression. I was very, yeah, I was dark myself. So I was very, but he just saw my pain. So he did not respond to all the ways I tried to push him away and frighten him off, because it was for me the first time, someone really came so close to me. At some point, he took a studio here in Amsterdam and moved into my house, and he was like, "Wow, this man is all of a sudden everywhere, away already." But he just saw the signs and responded to my pain rather than to, my expressions of it. And so that was, yeah, that was the way up. But it takes a while to,
Oh, I'm
some
sure.
habits you can
Yes, I
change
mean, you can't
overnight.
lose 40 years of mental habit, I suppose, emotional
Yeah,
habit,
so it wasn't,
no
yeah,
time.
that long, but but still, yeah. Yeah, no, no, it's a path, and I still have to kind of guard my thoughts about yeah, how we kind of rampage this earth as humankind. If I go there, then, that path down, and it
Yeah.
looks all very reasonable, but it's really not the way to go.
No. So, I mean, interestingly, the world, how did the world look? I mean, as you say, it looks quite black at the moment for at least some of us. But for me, that last half of the 1990s, it became I think there was hope. There was a feeling that things, well, what happened in the UK was that the Labour government, Tony Blair, in 1997 had this momentous victory. We'd had three government terms, or perhaps it was four, I can't even remember, but years of Conservative government, and that had just a bit like now, it had just gone, everything had gone downhill. It was worn out. It was, I mean, apart from the fact that it wasn't my kind of politics at all. But there was a sense of renewal when Labour got in, and they came into the theme tune of "Things Can Only Get Better," and it really did feel like
Hmm.
that. And actually, things did get better. Things got a lot better. And whether you agreed with all, or I agreed with all the politics, the neoliberal politics, there was lots to criticize. But actually, I mean, it was after the turn of the century that that we adopted our two little girls from Russia. But I then had children at primary school again. And I could literally see the school system, the education system improving. Money came into it. The village school my girls were at sort of grew and got more teachers, got more
Hmm.
funding. The health service, which is just in such a bad way at the moment, our NHS was working like, I mean, you just didn't need to complain about everything. When you asked for an appointment, you got an appointment within 2 weeks. Everything seemed to be going well. And I just think there was a feeling of, and I think this is the last time that we had it. There was a feeling of hope among, in the country generally, and perhaps, I don't know about in the world, but it certainly, I mean, even if you didn't agree, even if you didn't like Labour, even if you didn't like Tony Blair, there was a feeling of purpose and movement, and there were some very principled politicians around, like Mo Mowlam, who sadly died, Robin Cook, who also died, but there was sort of principle, but also there was a feeling of, prosperity was growing. People felt better off generally, I think. And I think that was the last time, that we've really felt like that.
Hmm.
What was it like? What was it like in Holland in the Netherlands at that
I
time?
don't even remember who the
No.
prime minister was at the time. But I do remember that at the time in the Netherlands, we had this word called polderen. Of course, we are famous for our polders, is where we take sea or lake and we make land of it, right? So that's
Yes,
called a polder.
right.
And then polderen was the verb that was coined for many stakeholders coming together to look at one issue and come with, a systemic solution. Also, it was the time in which, for instance, euthanasia was discussed.
Oh, and
And I
what's
think we
this?
had like a very, very broad and organized, dialogue in which all creeds and all beliefs and everyone from, of course, we need to have it to God forbid, was heard. And then a law came into effect, and I have no idea of the date, but just the process, a law came into effect, which then had a a big, how do you say it, draagvlak, people, of course, there was still people who felt, God forbid, but there was a way that it was phrased that, I mean, you don't have to do it, but can there be a choice for those
Yeah,
who, look at life in a different way and who are in, horrible physical or well, physical circumstances, mental, of course not, because you can't decide. And it felt like we were able to talk, to have so many parties around the table and for each to bring it forward. And of course, it all took a long time. But once, that was done, there was something there that everybody could feel, yes, my bit is in there too.
yeah.
And so it was ridiculized in a way because it was so slow. And, but it was really, abortion, euthanasia, these very difficult issues on which humans can have, as human beings, we can have such a different view on it. And to be able to orchestrate it in a way that something came out and people could say, yes, I can live with that. Okay,
So
this is
that
important.
is that became
Yeah,
the law in Holland. There in
yeah,
the Netherlands, there is
yeah.
you can choose to end your life in certain circumstances.
Yes, and there's a whole protocol, and it's not like I think of it now and I can do it tomorrow. It needs several doctors, it needs, thinking time, and all that came out of, gathering, say, collective wisdom.
Yeah, no, that's a wonderful way to have been working. That's
Yeah.
fantastic. And I mean, I always feel that the Netherlands is ahead of us in the UK in terms of sort of social thinking. And my impression, I don't actually know whether it's true or not, is that you're more like the Scandinavian countries. You have a better sort of, well, in my opinion, a better sort of social structure. I don't know whether, I mean, in the Scandinavian countries, I always think that childcare is very, very high on the agenda and available and makes such a difference to so many people. And I don't know what the specifics are in the Netherlands, but I feel that you no, I
I
no, no,
have
no,
no
I'm asking
children.
the
I have
wrong
no
person.
idea.
No,
But
no,
I
I
think
mean, but
in,
not just that, but
yeah,
all these sort of developing ideas are farther ahead. And I've always felt, perhaps just because I know you specifically, that education is better and less constricted in the Netherlands. I mean, it's not kind of constricted by class, the private schools, the public schools, the state school, the difference that, you come out of them as and how they impinge on your life opportunities
yeah.
and that just isn't there for you, is it?
Yeah, when I grew up, we had, primary schools that were like the Catholics and the Protestants, and then those who had really no creed at all. But it was not according to class. So it was according to belief. And when it started to fall away, but all education is basically available for everybody. And yeah, and that is still true. That is
And
still.
nobody goes, I mean, people don't, as a rule, pay to go to private schools
I
as
have no idea, Lucy. I know nothing of schools and school systems. It's just not in my
course
awareness,
not.
but it isn't so that I think parents might pay a contribution, but I have no idea. But
No, but it's not
not
sort of
being able to pay
aspirational
it,
to go to private school. That's not so, lots of people, well, actually, it's not lots of people here either. It's something tiny, like 8% of the population, I think, go to private school. But it feels like because there's such a preponderance of privately educated people in the upper echelons of jobs, of the law, of medicine, of politics, it feels like that is the way forward. And so it's an aspirational thing to do. It seems to
yeah.
be. It seems to be, if that's what you want for your children, then that's the
The
way to achieve it.
history of of you there on that island, I think, is very different from kind of the egalitarian history here, which, one theory is that because we all need to manage the water, the earl or the count doesn't count for anything more than the farmer because they all need to pitch in, and not necessarily now with the jugs and, things, but with so no, in our educational system, it's always possible for anyone with talent or with, to find a slot. Although there's also people who, want to become a doctor and there's only limited places, but then there's a lottery system. It's not it, no, it doesn't depend on where you come from or if you can afford it at all. Very
No.
and having said that, and I love our image as this, social country that cares for everybody, which in a way is true. But I've also seen that, 1 million people here out of 18 million go to the food bank.
Yeah.
And so, there is also poverty here.
Yes.
And of course, there's the language thing. You have the English language, people who come here need to learn Dutch. And of course, there's people who never really learn it, and children who can't really think in our secret language. And so, of course, there is some people are more advantaged than others, which just will always be true, I think.
Yes, of course. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And of course, I mean, yes, living in an English speaking country, I suppose it's one of those things that you just take for granted. And, here we are, and I'm expecting you to talk in English because, um,
Ja, laten we eens even Nederlands praten.
I'm so sorry. You did try
Ja,
and teach me a bit of Dutch when we were 8, but not much of it has stuck, and I certainly couldn't converse in Dutch. But
ja.
yes, I mean we just assume. And but another thing about the Dutch education system is that it seems to me, and again, this is just my perception, is that you learn loads of languages and you seem to learn them. Lots of people speak lots of languages, or far more than we do here, obviously, because we don't really need to.
Yeah, but that's all a bit a thing of the past
Is it?
because
Is
I
it?
think I learned Dutch, of course, and English, French, and German. And then because I was at a gymnasium, I did Latin and Greek, lots of that. But we have, I think 2 years after I graduated from high school, there was or secondary school, or however you call it, a middelbare school, we call it. There was a change, and now we are a bit more you take a package that is more languages, or a package that is more technical, or a package that is more mathematical. And but again, I know nothing of that. Really, don't talk to me about education. It's not, I think if you have children, you have to kind of engross yourself in this. But
Yeah, yeah, it's true. I mean, it's funny when I was young, when I was at school. I mean, you've just said, of course, I learned Dutch, I learned English, I learned French, I learned German,
well,
as if
that
that
was
was,
then. Yeah.
yeah, but that
Yeah.
was as if that was just of course I did. But we don't. I mean, and we didn't even when I was at school. I started learning French when I was 8. And that was, but that was, and then I did do Latin, I didn't do Greek. And then I chose to do Russian, goodness knows why. I think I was just trying to be
Might come in
smart.
handy, Lucy. You never know.
Well, in fact, it did come in handy because I adopted two girls from Russia. So
Of
when I went to
course.
Russia and I traveled to Russia and back 5 times in the space of about 3 years.
When was that?
That was in the in the 21st century.
Oh, so we talk
So
about that next
we could talk
time.
about that next time. But that was useful. I mean, I really could not speak Russian, but I could at least read the road signs and understand a little bit of what was being said. So that was handy. But I was unusual. And now, I mean, my grandson is just picking his GCSE. That's the sort of 16-year-old exams, sort of subjects. And he is having to do one other language, I think, and I think he is choosing to do Spanish. French used to be absolutely compulsory. French used to be, when we were small, that was what you needed to know because, the
French
French
at the
were our.
time was still, the kind of language that through which nobility, the Russians, the French, the British, the everyone's that was the lingua franca, and
Yeah,
it has been replaced
absolutely,
by
absolutely. And
the
then sort
version of English that we all speak.
yeah, no, it's strange, but I mean, he's not massively keen on doing Spanish, and I think, it's sort of like, well, you have to do another language. That's part of our curriculum, but it's not kind of the most popular or the
Choice.
most or
Yeah.
considered, seen as really necessary for people to get on. So yeah, it is a.
I did a lot of Latin. In the end, I studied Latin and Greek. It was a bit more than what is it? I took a bit more than I could chew, but it gives me a framework in which to put, other languages, and I think it is very useful in that way.
No, I completely agree, and I do, I do feel that it is really important to learn grammar, and you kind of learn. I mean, your own language, and yes, you can learn the grammar of it, but um, it's not so clear, I think, as when you go into another language and you see grammatical structure from the start. It's part of the learning process because obviously it isn't when you grow up speaking a language. It just comes out how it
Yeah, you
comes
don't
out.
know how it is. You don't
So
know
that
how the house is built.
Exactly. So, I mean, I'm very grateful that I also did Latin because that gives you the basis for so many other languages, all the Romance languages. And I did Italian later, and really, it's that made it easy. But
It's
also,
Latin fluid
yeah,
in
exactly.
fluid form. I want to celebrate an eldest daughter today
Please, let's do that.
because it is her birthday, her 92nd birthday, and I
Wow.
went to an overview exhibition of this woman called Yoko Ono.
Of course. Yes.
Of course. So earlier this morning, I was speaking to a 30-year-old, 30-something-year-old, and I talked to her about Yoko Ono, and I saw from her eyes, I mean, she is someone who immediately kind of Googles and goes to Wikipedia and then knows it, but she did not really know who this woman was. Whereas I think for us, I mean, how did Yoko Ono come into your life? This
As John Lennon's partner, as I mean, I think she got a lot of bad press when she and John Lennon got together.
So let's go back to who is John Lennon, because
Okay,
not everybody
so
knows who John Lennon
no,
is, my dear. We're
that's
ancient.
sort of unbelievable to me. So there were the Beatles in the 1960s. I'm thinking around 1962 or three. They became the most popular and extraordinary pop group for men. I think in this country, most people still know who they are, and there are two still alive, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr. But the sort of not really, but kind of unspoken leader was John Lennon. He was quirky and creative and had been to art school and was kind of outrageous. And anyway, the Beatles took the world by storm with their what now seem to be very kind of tame, but some wonderful songs. And then they went to America. They took England by storm. There were screaming hordes of young girls and young women going to see them. It was a phenomenon, and they were
Yes, so there were a
incredibly
few.
famous. And
I
John
think
Lennon said to a lot of disapprobation, "We're more famous than Jesus," which could well have been true, but it didn't go down well with a lot of people. But that they were a cultural phenomenon in retrospect. But everybody knew about them. They were part of the swinging 60s. They were fashion icons, and they moved from sort of being four young men in rather snappy suits to embracing kind of Indian meditation and wearing robes and just they just sort of were there all through the 60s and early 70s. I don't know when they broke up, but when they did, it was huge. The band kind of ended and they all went their separate ways. And Yoko Ono, as John Lennon's partner, was, I think, blamed for that, certainly in the media, because she was unusual. She didn't come across as one of those sort of friendly, media friendly girlfriends of pop star kind of thing. And yeah, so anyway, you can take up the story of Yoko Ono from there.
Yeah, well, also from the Beatles, it felt like music was a way for youth and for kind of the culture that after the war, there was a big movement. Let's make society as it was and continue as we did. And then music came and and the Beatles were kind of catalyzing youth culture. And now, when you look at them, they would wear their suits, they would wear identical suits, but they had long hair. And I remember, there was a discussion point about this hair that they
Oh
had.
my goodness, that was huge.
It
Yes,
was
long-haired
so big.
lads. Yes.
And it was a way of protesting, but also of, say, our generation, they're a bit older than we are, but our generation kind of finding a new wave and a new wavelength.
Yeah.
And their songs they sang in harmony. And yeah, the four of them were a phenomenon, as you say. We went to, my mother took us to the movie Hard Day's Night. And one girl in that tiny movie theater that we still had there, where in the place where I grew up, had to, be taken away because she became
Yeah.
hysterical. And there was hysterics around her. And Yoko, and I think within the band there was, John Lennon, as you said, was more intellectual, and George Harrison was more into the whole meditation and the whole India thing. And but John and Paul McCartney together were such a gifted team.
Yeah.
Let me confess to a guilty pleasure. I love, clips on Facebook or wherever I find them of, the Beatles. At some point, there's George Harrison, they're in the studio, and George Harrison says, I've been with this sound for half a year now, but I can't find the words. And then Paul and John say, but the words, just play it, the words will come. And then the words are, I don't know, I don't know. Even not knowing can be a song.
Yeah.
And it is so brilliant. So I think they were already kind of on different paths. And then Yoko Ono, who was an artist in her own right. I mean, she's really the first who put performance arts. And I just saw this video of her. She's dressed in black, and she sits with her legs kind of very chastely, and there's a pair of scissors. And her invitation is that people can take the scissors and cut pieces of her clothing.
And when was that? What date was that?
Oh my goodness, when was that? Um,
Approximately.
1965.
Oh, right.
Now, that's
Right.
only because I have an article here.
Oh, very
But
good.
1965. So just imagine when they were still in their suits and taking America by storm, singing Close Harmony and having this outrageous long hair, which is about, your length, but a little bit longer.
Oh, longer than that. More
Well, in
like
the beginning it was. It wasn't that long. But anyway, and she sits there. And so this is the instruction, right? And I sat there watching, and you see how no one makes contact with her. They just take the pair of scissors and cut a little piece of her sleeve or her skirt. But no one, and so there is not an instruction to be in contact with her. But I found it quite shocking how people just, follow the instruction that's there and forget that you can be in contact with someone before doing an act of co-creation and not just you.
So
And
she was.
then when, quite a lot of her clothing has already disappeared, there comes this man He's wearing a white shirt and he kind of says something to the camera that I didn't quite catch, but he's quite cocky and he cuts away a lot and he stays there much longer than other people. And then he cuts through, the bands, little bands of her camisole, and then he cuts through the bands of her bra. And you can just, even before that, I was breathing with Yoko and I was just seeing how difficult it is to just sit there and be composed and say, I do this and I'm showing you something, right? And then this man comes, and I so wonder how a person like that you would look back on this. But it's like, what an astounding piece of work and of courage and of symbolism of how, we are in the world given a pair of scissors and we cut here and there. We're not in contact with nature. We just take and then we show off, right? It was really very, very impressive. And this woman, yeah, is still around. She's on Instagram. She's
Amazing.
still an artist.
And you've just been to her latest exhibition
Yeah.
in London. So what's
No, it was in Düsseldorf.
oh, in Düsseldorf, sorry.
Exhibition has traveled from London to Düsseldorf.
Oh,
Düsseldorf is in
right.
Germany, of course, not so very far away.
No. And
I
so
was,
what's her artwork like today?
yeah, so it's more of an overview, but her artwork today can be seen on Yoko Ono Instagram. And so there's also this part from, say, this video, and she is really conceptual, so she will say mornings for sale, 9 to 10 a.m., late morning, coffee time. It's kind of what an idea. Our mornings are for sale. We sell our mornings, but can you have a morning for sale? What does that actually mean? And
Mm.
then in the end, there's the video where John and Yoko are in bed. They were here at the Hilton
Well,
Hotel.
yeah, that was her kind of key moment at that time. When yes, it was there it was called the Lie-In when we had when it was reported here, and they lay in bed for what, a week or something.
They were in bed for a week and they were saying it was all, there's also the Beatles song, Give Peace a
Give
Chance.
peace a chance,
All we
yes.
are saying is give peace a chance.
Yeah.
Also, in Düsseldorf, on the building, on the museum, was peace is power. And so she is very much still with that. And they would have, every 15 minutes, somebody would come and either kind of fulminate or speak their own way of seeing the world. And John and Yoko would just be there, can we love
It
each
was
other?
extraordinary. It was an
Can we love each other?
extraordinary. Yeah, it was an extraordinary event. I mean, they had the media in their bedroom. This was their honeymoon, essentially. They had just got
I love
married,
that. Yeah.
and they had they had their lie-in, their peace lie-in for a week. And the media just came and they just, talked to the media from their beds, and it was just
Yeah,
covered everywhere. It was like a
everywhere.
huge event because John Lennon was so famous. And, this was such an extraordinary thing to do in whatever year it was. I don't even can't even remember which year it was,
I don't remember what year it was.
but it was, and it was in Amsterdam, which somehow symbolized because everything was seemed freer. I mean, probably also perhaps to do with the freedom of drugs and things like that. In
That might have been part of it
might
too.
have had something to do with it, but it
Yeah.
was but yeah, it was a huge and extraordinary thing. So yeah, so Yoko Ono is 92, did you say?
Today.
Today, yes, yes, exactly. It's
Yes.
her birthday today. So yes, amazing. She has outlived many people and is still an extraordinary person
An
and an oldest
extraordinary person choosing, light over dark, choosing love over fear, choosing courage over fearfulness, and being in her quirky way, a model for that.
Yeah, yeah. And yet, how many people know about her anymore?
Oh, I think a lot of people
Oh,
know about her
probably. She's probably
still.
got a massive
I
following on
think she has
Instagram. So
millions on Insta, and she
yeah,
has these overviews, and yeah. But she was a person in our lives because when she came into our lives, kind of as the new partner of John Lennon, they all went their own way. And it's
yeah,
wonderful. Another one of the real psychology. because Paul McCartney is, he is on stage again
Yes. Oh,
with
yes.
Neil Young and with
Yes,
Ringo
with
Starr and with, with all the oldies singing these old songs of our
our
time.
time. Yes, exactly. Yes, even I, who don't like music, love the Beatles songs. But it's I mean it's really very moving when you see with the special effects of John Lennon and Paul McCartney on stage singing with John Lennon. The
This
film,
song that they resurrected, Here and Now,
yes,
Now and Then, I think
is
is called.
there on.
Oh,
Yeah,
Now and Then.
yeah.
Now and Then. That's what we are about to, Lucy.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Now and then. Well, next week, shall we talk about what happened at the turn of the century and the rest of our fifth decade? I think it is our fifth. I always get confused
Yes,
about
let's
that.
do that.
Yes, and what all the, yeah, not so great things that happened in the early 2000s.
Yes.
But yes, what an interesting discussion.
What an interesting time we are living through when we live.
What interesting times we have lived through and are living through. I feel we're very, very lucky to have been born when we were born, actually, and lived
I
through.
hope that is true for everybody.
Yes, well, of course, but yeah.
Okay, see you
Okay.
next week.
See you next week. Bye.